Good morning and welcome to today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. Of course, that's me. I am both your host and your guest today. The episode today is about trauma and unhealthy survivorship. And as you know, I'm all about healing on this show. But for those of us who need to heal or needed to heal, there is a reason why we need to. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of backstory on my trauma and unhealthy survivorship. I'm going to start today by just talking generally about what I have learned about both of those concepts, both trauma and unhealthy survivorship. And I am then going to get a little more specific and talk to you about, well, I'm actually going to read directly from Becoming an Empowered Survivor, my story about my unhealthy survivorship, so you can see what that looked like for me. Now, a lot of what I'm going to say to you today is content in Becoming an Empowered Survivor. So if you have not had an opportunity to read that book, I highly recommend that you go out and get it and read it. And hopefully today's episode will help you to understand why it's such a great resource for you when you are on your healing pathway. Or maybe it's the story that will inspire you to get on your healing pathway. All right, so let's get started. And again, I am going to start generally with the reason that we need to heal. I tell people all the time that trauma knows no demographic boundaries. It doesn't care who you are or where you come from. Not your age, your gender, your race, religion, or your socioeconomic status can protect you from trauma and survivorship. The only way to protect yourself from unhealthy survivorship and to end your suffering is to heal. I am both a victim and a survivor of trauma, and I've read about trauma and trauma response for my own healing purposes. And I've heard a lot of people talk about their trauma and abuse. And from these inputs, I've developed my understanding and beliefs about what trauma, unhealthy survivorship, and ultimately healing are about. I'm going to describe those to you in my own layman's language, and hopefully this will resonate with you. Trauma. So I believe that trauma is a human condition that disempowers us as a survivor. Every single one of us have and will suffer trauma in one way or another during our lives. And some of us, like me, have suffered sustained trauma over time. Sustained trauma can result from significant events, what I think of as macrotraumas, the effects of which remain with us for a very long time, perhaps forever. We see this in the lingering physical and emotional toll of being sexually abused, or the lingering physical and emotional toll of a chronic, life-threatening illness, or the forever void in our very existence created with the unexpected loss of a child, the loss of a parent when we were a child, or even the tragic loss of a beloved pet. Sustained trauma can also come from the constant layering of what I think of as microtraumas. These include our daily encounters with anyone whose actions or words cause us to hurt, even in the slightest way. For example, this may include a spouse displaying contempt through their facial expressions or even through their words, or not showing up to support us on the absolute worst day of our lives. Or a parent's inability to nurture their child emotionally after a difficult day at school or when their best friend moves away, or a workplace environment where an encounter with a colleague includes sexual harassment. Sometimes, perhaps often, macrotrauma is filled with microtraumas. Divorce is a macrotrauma. The events and effects surrounding a divorce, the daily hurtful encounters caused by or with our significant other before, during, and after the divorce day, those are all microtraumas. Now, I don't believe the severity of trauma and abuse can be ranked by degrees. Instead, its impact is measured in the receiving person's response based on who they are and what they have experienced. Some people react negatively to an event, while others may perceive it as minor or a microtrauma. Yet other people will move through what some may consider to be a heinous and very traumatic event with strength and resiliency. Perhaps this is just a reflection of who they are, or maybe they are sufficiently healed to react this way. As survivors, our lives are reflected in how we respond to trauma and abuse. If we react negatively, we probably rely on unhealthy coping mechanisms that don't serve us. If we respond more positively, we're probably healthier in using better coping skills and tools. Unhealthy survivorship develops on the flip side of the same coin where we survive our trauma and abuse. While trauma differs for everyone, living encumbered by unhealthy survivorship is something many of us have in common. Unhealthy survivorship is my phrase for the negative ways we, as survivors, cope with events that harmed us. The impact of our unhealthy survivorship on how we live causes us increased and prolonged suffering. We can't do anything about what happened to us in the past, but we can overcome our unhealthy ways. We can overcome substance abuse. We can overcome suicidal ideation. We can overcome our own emotional and physical abuse of others. We can overcome our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. We can quiet our hateful inner critic. But more importantly, we can find love and engage in healthy, supportive relationships, including with ourselves. We just need to heal, which, of course, is why this show is all about healing. I'm going to pause for a moment on the demographic of gender. And that's because I think about men a lot in the context of healing. Of course, I'm a woman, but I know that men and women, we are all the same in what we experience in terms of trauma and abuse, survivorship, and the need to heal are not bound by any of those demographic boundaries that I already talked about. The one I believe to be most problematic to navigating healing is gender. Not feeling safe to admit trauma, unhealthy survivorship, and the need to heal comes up almost every time I talk with men who are survivors. They feel society's judgment, which generally teaches us that men should be strong and resilient no matter what, and therefore, they just don't have anything to heal from. If they do experience trauma, they're expected to somehow just get over it, or when they need help, they think they shouldn't admit it, or else they may appear weak. They believe any attempt to get help should be done in secret. These are all ridiculous judgments, in my opinion. Males can be hurt in all the same ways females can, and to say otherwise is unfair. The emotional toll of macro and sustained microtraumas can be just as impactful regardless of gender, and all can experience the same unhealthy survival methods. As human beings, we are all the same, therefore, we are all emotional beings. All right, that's enough about the generalities. I am now going to talk to you about my need to heal specifically. I am going to read chapter 3 in the section of Becoming Empowered Survivors titled The Need to Heal. The chapter, Acknowledging Truths, describes how I lived as an unhealthy survivor. But before I begin reading that chapter, I want to touch briefly on the macros and micro traumas I've experienced. So here comes the factual and presented in an emotionless way shopping list of the macro and micro traumas that I've experienced in my life. I became a survivor at the age of 5 when my grandfather sexually abused me. I was date raped, bullied, and betrayed by my friends in high school when I was 15. I grew up with 2 parents who are also survivors, and the manifestation of their survivorship impacted my life in profound ways, the same as it does for everyone who lives with an unhealthy survivor. My dad was Jekyll and Hyde. He is my dad, but at times he was just another person suffering under the weight of his own unhealthy survivorship. My mom believed in the generalization about the firstborn child, perpetuating the order and perfection of that mythical child on me, which allowed me to flourish as the perfect child. The dysfunction in our home got bad starting in 1980 as I turned 10 years old. My dad would drink, and that's when Jekyll became Hyde. My parents would fight, sometimes violently. It would be years before my mother could share with me what my parents both endured when they fought. I met my husband, Tristan, that's his pseudonym in the book, in college just before I turned 19 in 1989. Our 30 plus years together were filled with chaos and trauma. I experienced a lot of emotional abuse. We divorced in 2022. Our divorce was a casualty of my healing process. I have moved to and lived in 15 different cities around the world. These were cities initially foreign to me as an American, but growing up as I did caused me to be a foreigner when I moved back to the US for college. As an adult, each move grew in size and difficulty until the last one, going from sea level in Texas to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, almost killed me. 2 semi-trucks and many trips hauling a 35-foot flatbed trailer were required to move everything that we moved. I've experienced 3 floods, 2 remodels ending in lawsuits with the contractors, an undisclosed 50-pound beehive honeycomb between the first and second floors of a house we bought, destruction of a rental property, a well pump that was struck by lightning, and massive property damage in an epic hailstorm. We hemorrhaged cash for years, too much frivolous spending, and constantly recovering from mistakes, all in the endless pursuit of happiness, which we never found. Tristan had legal trouble that caused him to be unemployable in his mind, and I became the financial provider. I was a hamster trapped on a spinning wheel for years. Add to all of this the 15 or 16, I actually lost count at some point, surgeries Tristan underwent during our time together. What a life, right? Reading an excerpt from the book will probably give you questions, and that's okay, because you can always read it to get all of your answers. Chapter 3, Acknowledging Walls. I lived far too many years behind the wall I had built to protect myself from the trauma and abuse others inflicted on me. Some of those people who hurt me should have protected me, but they didn't. Others represented passing relationships with those who never cared about my well-being. In the moment, they only considered what they wanted. In some cases, what I survived occurred in a single moment, but in other cases, the pain not only blindsided me, but continued over many years. I also suffered from my hurtful actions against myself, my trauma responses, and unhealthy survivorship. With each experience, both trauma and survival layered on top of me, event by event, year by year. As a result, my wall grew and grew. When I discovered it post-hypnotherapy, it was 45 years tall and 45 years thick. Trapped behind it, I was alone and lonely. How I lived my life, the elements of being in survival mode behind my wall, are described in this chapter. I'll tell you in my own words while associating common clinical terms where relevant. I knew nothing about some of this when I was trapped behind my wall. Other parts I could explain conceptually, but I had no idea there were these clinical terms associated with my trauma responses. I'm much more knowledgeable now, so I can use today's standard terms to explain better how I lived. Dissociation. 5 years of age is very young to have been sexually abused for the first time. I remember the event vividly, as if it were recorded in my mind like a movie, and I'm right back there when I think about it. That memory is so vivid that I can smell the foul stench of my perpetrator's cigar-laden breath mixed with his body odor emanating as if he hadn't bathed after several days of toiling in the hot summer sun. For a survivor, that depth of memory causes a reliving of the trauma. That may be the only time I was sexually abused as a child, but I don't know for sure because I suffer from dissociation. My dissociation began that day when my grandfather abused me. I have almost no recorded memories for the rest of my childhood and fuzzy memories at best of my early adult years. Even milestone events in my life, like my 16th birthday, high school graduation, and wedding, aren't recorded in my mind. I cannot relive being in any of those places or times. It's as if someone took an eraser to the whiteboard of my mind and wiped it clean. Most of what I know about these days comes from photographs and stories people have told me. Dissociation also showed up, sometimes still does, during conversations with someone attacking or rejecting me emotionally. The recorder of my mind stops, even though I'm fully engaged in the conversation. Even months later, I hold no recollection of what we talked about. This phenomenon makes it hard to explain to someone what they said exactly to hurt me. I can't remember the details, but I can remember how they made me feel. Discovering the words dissociation and dissociative amnesia formed some of my first moments of being touched by the universe during my healing. In these moments, I literally felt the universe, the hand of God, reaching out and touching me with an awakening. Strength and knowledge emanate from a being who looks like an archangel in my mind, beaming protection over me and my spirit through love. That's what it feels like. And I'm filled with the excitement and jubilation at the experience each time. I call these universe touches. I've had many of these moments as I've healed, though now they tend to be epiphanies that make the hair on my arms stand up rather than a jubilant feeling of excitement. I guess I've come to expect them now as markers of my progress on my healing journey, a higher power continuing to lead me. For years, I was desperately curious about why I didn't have memories like other people. In the curious way we do, I would query others to try and understand how their memories worked and what they saw in their mind's eye when they remembered. Do you remember the day you graduated from high school? Right now, are you back in the moment, in your mind's eye? Can you see yourself there that day as it was when you experienced it? Do you remember what you were wearing? Do you remember who sat on either side of you as you waited to cross the stage? What about your wedding day? Do you need the video to remind you, or is it recorded in your mind? Do you remember walking down the aisle? I had none of these memories. So I marveled at people who could see themselves there in the moment, even something that happened to them 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. Yes, some details may have faded over time, but generally, they seem to be present with the subject and time of their memories. I never understood why mine were gone until I began to read about survivorship. Eventually, this made sense to me. And now I believe dissociation has been my brain's way of protecting me. Some survivors have vivid memories of what happened to them, but for some reason, that wasn't my brain's choice. I trust my brain, so I don't go searching for what is hidden. I don't need to know those facts about my life to heal, and I don't need the triggers. I also believe at least part of the reason why my brain chose dissociation over recording my trauma was to prevent me from being so damaged that I was unable to heal. Knowing that dissociation is normal for trauma survivors was hugely beneficial to my understanding of my survivorship. Something finally made sense. I didn't feel so alone because I realized I'm not the only one. There's so many of us with this condition that the experts have officially labeled it. Substance abuse. My alcohol and drug abuse began when I was in high school and gradually worsened through my early adult years. Part of my substance abuse came from trying to fit in with the crowd in my early years. I was trying to make BJ a cool kid in high school. But as I got older and my trauma piled on, it became about coping, escaping, and trying to feel something while also numbing the pain, particularly the pain that came from some of my interactions with my parents and Tristan. Perhaps alcohol and drugs were another form of dissociation. I escaped this survival mechanism when the crowd I ran with began to get into criminal activity. Staying one step ahead of the law to protect illegal gambling rings went on for several months, culminating in our business partner and supposed friend ordering a hit on a local county sheriff who was just trying to uphold the law. That friend supplied a lot of the drugs, but ordering the hit on another person's life was a deal breaker for me and our relationship. It scared me out of our friendship and scared me out of the drugs. Fortunately for me, when I decided to stop using these substances, I could. Pick it up, put it down is in my DNA, and I do not have an addictive personality, thankfully. Perhaps another gift from the universe. Drugs have been gone from my life for a long time, but even today, if I'm ever in the depths of dealing with a hurtful relationship, alcohol could be a problem if I allowed it to be. My family in exile. I was estranged from my parents for many years of my adulthood, continuing for a while post-hypnotherapy. During the years of my estrangement, if anyone asked about my parents, I went through a painful and contorted explanation, painstakingly clarifying that the decision to estrange was mine and not theirs. Just to be clear, I'm not the family's black sheep, I insisted. I decided to estrange from my family. It was my choice to walk away, not their choice to cast me out. Natalie and her kids, my nephew and two nieces, were included in the people I exiled. So too were my extended family. None of this was about choosing sides. Instead, when I became estranged from my parents, I stepped out of all their lives. I had no need to make anyone feel like they had to choose sides, nor was I trying to punish my parents or other family members in any way. I just wanted peace from what had become a highly toxic environment while interacting with my parents, my mom in particular. My mom and I fought a lot when I was a young adult after my parents repatriated to the US. She would argue that my feelings I didn't understand and couldn't explain were wrong. Feelings are never right or wrong, by the way. And we would end up in screaming matches, even in public. Our interactions were emotionally unsafe for both of us, and I chose to step away from the toxicity. Many families are burdened by dysfunction, and mine is no different. Our dysfunction comes from all of us being survivors of traumatic human-to-human experiences, including with our parents. I know more today about my dad's experiences than I did when I exiled my family, and I continue to learn about my mother as we work to heal our relationship. None of us are alone in survivorship. I must highlight how my parents' experiences manifested in my life, ultimately playing a significant role in creating my wall. I chose the following example because it will become relevant later when discussing my healing evolution and exploration of love. This shows how my home environment wasn't a safe space when I was a teenager, during a time when I could have been learning to develop a healthy, intimate relationship with males. Not only was I not learning about this, but I was also learning a solid lesson on how to isolate myself, estrange myself from my parents. Several factors contributed to my home not being a safe space to learn how to develop healthy, intimate relationships. This dynamic reflected my parents' experiences and how they lived then. First, sex in my immediate family was a taboo subject and a topic seldom, maybe never, discussed. Looking back now, I can see that my dad was trying to shield me from anything that looked like sexual abuse. His reasons are obvious now, of course, because my dad is a cycle breaker. In fact, the greatest gift he ever gave to me, and the one I'm most grateful for, is that he never sexually abused me. I shudder to think how messed up my life could have been if he had perpetuated onto me the generational curse that plagued our family. Second, I was raised in a home where strict Christian values and teachings were ever present. I was taught that sex out of wedlock is a sin. My expected behavior from this teaching was, just don't do it. But that was it. To my recollection, that was the extent of talking about it with my parents. I was also taught that sex out of wedlock, with heaven forbid a baby made, would disrespect the family and disgrace their name. Ironic, isn't it? My grandfather's behavior was buried for so many years, yet the message remained, do not tarnish the family name by getting pregnant. My first sexual relationship was during my first year of college. Mostly it was a healthy relationship, I think, although it was an upperclassman who may have seen me as a conquest. I never told my parents anything about that young man. They were living far away from me for the entirety of that relationship, which meant there was never an opportunity for them to meet. It wasn't until my junior year of college, after I had been dating Tristan for some time, that my mother initiated a conversation one day. Out of the blue, she asked me, "Are you having sex with him?" Her reaction to my yes answer was exasperation and disappointment. That made me feel like a sinner, like I was doing something wrong, even though I loved him and my inner knowing knew we were headed for marriage and a life together. I don't recall discussing with my mother how I felt about him or whether I loved or would marry him. After that, they showed no genuine attempt to accept him, nor did he try to accept my parents. All three of them got in the way of any bonding, but I had expected more from my parents for my sake. The divide between them became a contributing factor to my exiling my parents. It was easy for them to part ways and easier for me to choose Tristan over them because I didn't feel the pull of a bond with either parent sufficient to keep me from walking away. The other factor at play was that my dad's reaction to me dating a boy in high school was to tease me. He would make fun of me, almost bullying me. Becky's got a boyfriend, he'd tease in a sing-song voice that made me recoil in embarrassment. I felt shame. Whenever I had the chance to not tell my parents about a relationship, I felt relief. Because of how my dad made me feel small and inadequate, I never lasted more than a couple of weeks dating someone. I had plenty of opportunities in short-term relationships. Still, as soon as my parents learned about any boy, my dad's teasing would drive me to end the connection almost immediately. Even if the teasing hadn't begun, but a situation was developing into something they might discover, I would end it. Sadly, not one of those boys ever knew why. I'm not even sure I knew why back then. Now, I see my reaction was merely avoiding an inevitably unbearable situation with my dad. When I put my parents in exile, I had no foundation to lean on to understand what was happening to them. I only felt the deep pain of emotional neglect, which sometimes felt like outright rejection or abandonment as I tried to express any of my feelings as an adult. I had rarely expressed my feelings as a child, and doing so didn't get easier as I got older. My pain from our human-to-human interaction had been building for many, many years by the time I made my decision. I desperately wanted my pain to stop, and I saw exile as the only path forward. Emotionless. Over the years behind my wall, I became mostly emotionless. I've had the good fortune to reclaim my relationship with my parents recently. More about this to come. But one of the benefits of reconnecting has been talking about what happened to me and how it impacted me. Of course, the initial abuse by my grandfather when I was so young has had a fair amount of conversation, particularly with my dad, because it was his father. Why didn't you tell me? My dad asked me not so long ago. I don't know, Dad. What exactly does a 5-year-old say about something like that? He shrugged and raised his eyebrows in a silent acknowledgement of the truth. But my mom recognized that I was emotionless from an early age. Recently, she told me that when she looks back at pictures of me as a child, she can see I almost never smiled. Sad, but another truth. Photographs don't lie. I had already withdrawn inside of myself. I don't remember much about my life through my early 20s, mainly because of my dissociative amnesia, so I cannot say much about my emotions in those years. I made many friends in college who remember our good times together, so I must have had some joy then. But before, in high school, I'm not so sure. Growing up internationally, we were somewhat transient with our relationships anyhow, but high school is also when I again suffered sexual abuse, coupled with that bullying and betrayal. None of my friends seemed to care, and because of my dad's teasing around boys, I didn't feel safe telling my parents. I was isolated and alone in dealing with that trauma, which I'm sure also contributed to me being emotionless. As an adult in my 30s and early 40s, I went through a few years where deep sadness flowed freely from me. I sobbed uncontrollably, triggered by what seemed like silly things, like a TV or a movie scene wherein a father and daughter or husband and wife were lovingly hugging one another after a heartfelt conversation. Back then, I had no idea why I sobbed. Suddenly, my tears would just flow. Embarrassed, I would rush to wipe them away and pray, God, please don't let me cry in public. This was also the time during which most discussions with my mother would end in a fight, leaving me to feel that my emotions were wrong. I never talked about what I experienced or felt with my dad, and I didn't know how to share my feelings with Tristan. I'm not sure how he would have responded anyhow, given who he is and how he responded to me in those days and weeks after my hypnotherapy session. Then, as I grew older and my wall grew, my emotions mostly quit flowing. Occasionally, I could be provoked to a major outburst of anger if someone, my mother or Tristan, made me angry. I was like a human volcano, quiet outside but rumbling inside until something would cause me to erupt. A handful of times, losing a beloved pet made me very sad, but I rarely experienced joy. Mostly, I stuffed my emotions into little boxes that became stones in my wall. I recall the feelings of happiness and joy were situational and momentary, like when Tristan and I raced in the Big Bend Open Road Race in the early 2000s. The car race was on a highway between two small towns in West Texas, near Big Bend, where a 60-mile stretch of road closed to everyone except the racers. Anyone could enter the race with any car so long as any of the vehicle's safety modifications met the requirements for the speed class entered. We raced there and back across the 60 miles with the goal of maintaining an exact speed over the entire course. The winner in each speed class was the car closest to maintaining the speed end to end. For example, 1 second over or under maintaining 110 miles per hour, our speed class, and you wouldn't win. We were something like 10 seconds off the perfect time for a 120-mile race. It was no small feat to be perfect, but our plus 10 seconds meant placing 14th, as I recall. The few hours of the race itself were exhilarating and a lot of fun, and I've seen a picture of me smiling inside our car. This is one of the few memories partially recorded in my mind from this period. But the before and after were flanked with the typical chaos of my married life. Busyholics in chaos. I suffered from the demands and madness of my life. At the same time, I struggled to meet Tristan's expectations of me. To be fair, I'm guessing he would say the same thing about suffering from the chaos and demands of our lives. As if getting from East Texas to West Texas with our race car in tow on a flatbed trailer and competing in the race wasn't enough, we also had two young puppies with us, Australian Shepherds. They were demanding in their care and training, and we were trying to keep consistency for them. Anything that didn't meet Tristan's expectations, I felt through his reactions and ensuing actions toward me, and it was always my fault. I constantly sensed his dissatisfaction and disappointment, often through the way he looked at me with what felt like contempt. I was perpetually in a mode of doing with everything I had in me to make everything okay, always trying to meet his expectations and keep him happy, striving to avoid an irrational reaction. Racing and caring for two young puppies, I got no physical rest, and dealing with Tristan was emotionally exhausting. Our car in the race was an almost new, pristine, candy apple red 50th anniversary edition Corvette Z06. I was afraid of damaging that car, afraid of Tristan's inevitable anger and visible display of disappointment should it be damaged even in the slightest of ways. Ironically, I was the one working to provide the means to buy the car, so I should have been able to enjoy it as much as he did, but I rarely drove it, even though I loved the thrill of running through the gears and feeling the car's aerodynamics at high speed when it drew down and embraced the road like an old friend. My fear extended into ensuring the car made it out to West Texas unharmed while tied down to a flatbed trailer. Ensuring we, including the puppies, had everything we needed for the trip and race can only be described as chaos. Chaos in the packing, so as not to forget even one thing. Chaos in our truck, trailer, and race car moving down the road. Chaos in fulfilling the racing requirements and maintenance of the vehicle. Chaos in taking care of the dogs. Chaos in taking care of Tristan. Chaos if anything went even slightly awry, as Tristan's emotions would show it. I tell that story because it highlights some excitement in my life, but it came at a price. The kind of chaos was my norm for about 25 years. While I worked my full-time demanding job, first as an independent financial statement auditor, and then as a forensic accountant investigating white-collar crime and developing into a business leader and mentor, I also worked a full-time demanding job on our mini ranches. And making all those moves of our mini ranch added to the chaos. Each was laden with its own microtraumas. We were never finished moving. The land always had some need to tend the pasture or repair the endless things that needed mending. I've repaired barbed wire fences by truck headlights more times than I care to remember. And at times, we had many, many animals to care for. There must have been 80 at the highest head count, including dogs, cats, cows, goats, horses, chickens, ducks, geese, and our serval cats. I experienced a lot of death with our animals, some with the normal expiration of life, others tragically. I agonized in gut-wrenching pain the day I helped my miniature schnauzer Roscoe crossed the Rainbow Bridge at an old age. He was the son I never had. And the horse I learned to ride on died unexpectedly of a flesh-eating fungus, phycomycosis. Dakota's death never left me. Then there was my Egyptian male cat, Sebastian, whom Tristan shot because Sebastian was a killer. Tristan fed the wild birds and squirrels, and our fowl and their babies were free range on our property. There is the natural order in the animal world, and Sebastian was a predator, sometimes killing the birds, squirrels, and our fowl. There was irony in Tristan killing Sebastian and pain for me. Steele, my beloved Australian Shepherd, was killed tragically and viciously by Bambi, the pit bull owned by our caretaker in Conifer. When we allowed Bambi to move in with her, I knew the risk that our two dogs would fight because I had seen them interacting. But in my desperation to move to Hong Kong, I ignored the warning signs. And Steele paid the ultimate price. I was devastated by her death. All the macro and micro traumas made us busyholics in chronic chaos. Rarely, if ever, was there rest from the demands of our life. We created much of our own suffering and never found peace. Self-isolation and repression. While I didn't know it at the time, I began to lose myself that day when I was first abused as a young child. First came the dissociation. Then came my long marriage wherein I gave everything I had to Tristan, emotionally, financially, mentally, and physically. I kept very little for myself, and for many years, any form of self-care was non-existent. I even gave up something as simple as listening to music, which I loved because he did not like music generally, and certainly not the music I liked. Giving it up meant I wouldn't think about it, which was easier than arguing. I wouldn't risk being disappointed repeatedly by his resistance. I also gave up going to the movies that I would have enjoyed. I saw a small number of blockbusters on the big screen, Titanic, Lord of the Rings trilogy, and Avatar, but I could tell he was miserable and didn't want to be there. That extended even to watching movies at home, so we rarely did. But one of the benefits of traveling as much as I did for work is the phenomenal and current movie selection airlines offer. I had plenty of time on long hauls worldwide and cross-country domestic flights, so I'm not totally void of music trivia these days. I also gave up being creative of doing any artwork, including painting, needlework, or crafts. This one gets to the core of who I am and who I gave up for far too many years. I've learned I am creative and analytical, dual-brained, left and right side active. This is why I did so well professionally, always analytical around the facts, but using innovative methods to track down the unique ways people commit fraud. Artwork, particularly painting, feeds my soul through the expression of myself and my emotions. Shopping with girlfriends, getting a massage, or some other pampering never happened. Getting my hair and nails done was only about maintenance and professional image, not self-care for the benefit of my well-being or time to enjoy being together with my sister or a friend. I gave up most activities that contributed to me. I gave up my family, a familyectomy, if you will indulge me, and my friends. This especially applied to family and friends who I really needed as part of my support team. Tristan didn't like them, and letting them go was easier than fighting. Sure, my past trauma with my parents made distancing myself from them easy. In our spare time, our extracurricular activities mostly represented what interested Tristan, prioritizing the animals on land, car racing, motocross racing, horses and rodeoing, snowboarding, and so on. I tried to get into everything that interested him, hoping I would find sustained fulfillment, but I never did. Joy never came. Instead, I felt disappointed, compounded by the stress of the preparation and logistics of getting to wherever we were going. Often the process was just hard. Sometimes we experienced more chaos. Car racing probably came the closest to bringing me joy, though it, too, was rife with chaos beyond the racing experience. Motocross racing was like car racing in terms of the chaos before and after the events, although I didn't have the same fear of damaging the bikes as I did with the Corvette. I did enjoy pushing myself to see what I could do on the bike. Snowboarding isn't my thing, and I'm definitely a beach girl, not a snow bunny. I suppose losing myself, too, may be another manifestation of my dissociation, my escape. But the toll on me was tremendous. I survived many years being mostly alone, separated from people who would have enriched my life. Much of the time in those early years with Tristan was good, but even that relationship eventually became about running the business of our life together, not about emotional support. And I always felt like I was his last priority, ranking third or fourth, somewhere behind him, land, animals, and other things. He cried when he sold his race car, not the Corvette, but another car he had raced as an amateur to provide the cash we needed to recover from our hemorrhage after our Myrtle Springs Combine Kaufman debacle. He also cried at selling his cows when we moved from Texas to Colorado, although he chose to live in a part of Colorado where the terrain wasn't suited for raising cattle. Then he cried as he considered losing the land he loved so much in Colorado because of our pending divorce. He also cried when each of the Servals died. The last one who passed was Princess, whom he adored. I have a photo of the two of them, my greatest reminder today of how much he loved her. The look on his face, a look I have never seen directed at me, is deep devotion. But I never saw him cry over me, not even as our marriage ended and our lives parted ways. I had no tribe, so I felt utterly alone and lonely behind my wall. Why would I choose Tristan over my family and friends? I've asked myself this question occasionally as I've coursed through my healing journey, always foregoing the work to answer. It doesn't matter, I would say to myself dismissively, but it does matter. It matters because I don't want to make the same mistake again as I continue my journey to know true love. So I will attempt to answer that question. Part of the answer lies in the human condition of being trauma survivors, which Tristan and I shared. I think we were drawn and held together by an unconscious understanding of each other's pain and suffering. From the first day we met, we had no idea we were both trauma survivors and no idea we both needed to heal. Because we had never healed, our unhealthy survivorship perpetuated more trauma for both of us throughout our marriage. I drove on our first date. Otherwise, I would have ridden on the back of his off-road motorbike. His mother had recently taken back his car, which she had gifted him because she needed money for something or other. That type of behavior from her was ever present. Putting herself and her needs before those of her child meant he went without for much of his life before me. Even providing basic childcare needs for him, like getting your car to school and ensuring he had food, was scarce. From an early age, Tristan got himself to school by seeing where the hands were on the clock even before he could tell time, and on many days, school was the only place where he ate. I met his father only twice in all our years together. I could sit beside him today, and he would have no idea who I am. Another reason I chose Tristan over my family and friends is that our relationship fed my need to be a caregiver. However, my caregiving turned into rescuing, and I suffered as his rescuer. Rescuing him meant I always prioritized him and gave him space to do whatever he needed or wanted. I put myself aside, hiding behind my wall for him. I also deeply value commitment, and I'm an eternal optimist. When I commit to someone, I'm entirely in. Therefore, it took me a while to accept that my marriage had served its purpose and was no longer fulfilling my highest and best good. My commitment kept me in the marriage twice as long as I probably should have stayed, although the story of my life, the story written in this book, meant I had to stay. All those years, optimism gave me hope for a better tomorrow. Lost behind my wall. During every waking moment, I gave to some other living being or thing except myself. My state of being wasn't something I consciously considered. Rather, I was just always focused on someone or something else. Demands on my time started when Tristan and I first began dating in college. I lived in my fraternity house back then. I'm a member of the Chi Omega Women's Fraternity, the first sorority established before the word sorority was coined, so we're a women's fraternity. Whenever I needed to stop by the house to pick up something while on our way to somewhere else, usually his house, he would wait for me outside. Other girls' boyfriends would go inside and wait for them, socializing with others in the house for however long it took, but not Tristan. When I was in the fraternity house, I was on a time limit for no other reason at all than he didn't want to wait for me. He'd point at the clock in the car as we parked, and as I opened the door to exit, he'd say, "It's 6:54. I'm leaving at 7:04 with or without you." I acquiesced, hurriedly doing whatever I needed with little time to engage or bond with my fraternity sisters and receive any emotional nourishing from them. Being treated that way was painful enough, but you know what the real kicker was? We were in my car, not his. Yet I said nothing against his demand, not even, "Okay, I'll take you home first and then come back." Instead, I just complied and obeyed. In that way, from the very beginning of our relationship, I was telling him how he treated me was okay and reinforcing his power over me. I relinquished my voice. Those kinds of demands continued as I worked my 2 full-time jobs. For many years, he had this insane expectation I would leave the office at a very specific time so I could get dinner on the table exactly 90 minutes later. That was increasingly difficult to manage over the years as my job demands increased, driven by my upward progression. The better I performed, the more in demand I became, and the more time I needed to be at the office. Getting home at a specific minute every day became harder and absurd as an expectation, frankly. At some point, he accepted the day-to-day demands that came with my success. Eventually, my job took me through several years of international travel to investigate allegations of corruption and bribery of foreign officials around the world. The demands for my time were met with anger when I didn't answer his calls immediately. Usually, he needed something that wasn't important in the grand scheme, like the input on the location of some tool. I retained a catalog memory of where stuff was stored, which amazes me considering my ability to dissociate along with the vast number of tools, equipment, and materials, often in duplicate or triplicate, we owned with a full working ranch. Sometimes he wouldn't reach me on his first attempt. "Where are you?" He'd react in a sharp tone once we connected. "I've been trying to call you. I can't find the wrench we were using last weekend on the tractor. Where is it?" "I'm sorry. I was in a meeting with my boss, and I didn't have my cell phone with me," I'd answer, my heart sinking into my stomach as I braced for more. I could hear him sigh as he built up his next outburst. I pictured him, angry and standing in the building, surrounded by all that unorganized stuff, standing in the chaos. "You answer that phone immediately when I call you. That's why you have it." The condensation echoed in his voice. "You have that phone so I can reach you anytime, no matter what. As usual, your job is more important than me." At this point, he was yelling, and I couldn't hear myself think, "I'm so tired of your job being your priority. It's all you care about." "I'm sorry, Tristan. You know that's not true." I got called into his office on short notice and accidentally left my phone behind. It wasn't intentional. "That phone better be on you at all times, and when I call, you answer," he demanded. "I'm trying, Tristan. I'll do better. I'll try to remember to have my phone with me." I really did try. But in the late 2000s, having your cell phone attached like another appendage as it is today wasn't a thing. While Tristan was angry when he couldn't reach me immediately, on the other side, I got questioning looks from colleagues and clients if they saw my cell phone outside of my bag. This worrisome balancing act stressed me out, and again, there was no real reason for his behavior. His reaction to not being able to reach me immediately wasn't warranted. Nothing he said was true, but it also wasn't worth arguing. He just never accepted the demands of my job, which paid for our lifestyle, and the resulting pressure on me. The compounding effect of his constant and increasingly unreasonable demands pushed me to an unhealthy place. Not too many years after the Big Bend Open Road Race, I bought a used, white, manual transmission 2000 Mazda Miata MX-5 convertible. Every Mazda enthusiast who owns a soft top convertible wants the hard top too. The hardtop is much better in the winter to keep the elements out. Plus, it just looks cool and gives the car an entirely different look. But hardtops are difficult to come by on older models. I'm lucky to have one. I've had the car for more than 15 years, and it's still today one of my rare prized possessions. It's nothing fancy, simple, like me. I love the exhilaration of pushing the car through its 5 speeds. I'd always dreamed of restoring it my way. That never happened until recently when I began the process. When Tristan and I divorced, I pretty much walked away. I only wanted my freedom and did what I had to do to get it. That meant walking away from almost every possession and what they had symbolized that had been in my life before I moved to Hong Kong, all of which were in Conifer. The summer before our divorce was final, I visited the house in Conifer while Tristan was in Thailand. I wanted to get my stuff, having no idea what that would mean when I arrived. That's when I drove away with just the coffee table and 12 banker's boxes in the back of a Suburban. I left my Miata behind. Thankfully, at the very last minute of negotiating our divorce settlement, someone who knew what the car meant to me told me to get it. I paid Tristan $900 for it. I shouldn't have paid him 1 cent more than our settlement already dictated, but it was worth it to me, and I probably would have given him more. My Miata is much more than a car to me. I've begun to work on it, which is the realization of a personal dream, doing something for myself that I wanted to do for more than 15 years, but a dream shelved while I put everyone and everything else first. The awful reality is that I had no awareness. I was so lost behind my wall. I didn't even know it existed until I began to learn about my unhealthy survivorship. Soon after discovering it, I knew my only way forward to break it down was to heal. So I did. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. That's me, your host, and your healing mentor. Until next time, come on, everyone, let's heal. Thank you for watching today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. If you've enjoyed the content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at Beth Jones Healing Mentor. The Let's Heal show is available on all major podcast platforms. And if you'd like to know more about me and the work that I do to serve other survivors of trauma and abuse who are healing, please visit me on the web at empowersurvivors.com.